afternoon and good evening to all of you. We are starting a new webinar promoted by South Asia Democratic Forum. The webinar's title is Chinese-led expansionism across the Himalayas. I would, before presenting our speakers, I would just recall that last April, we did have a webinar on Putin's war in Europe. Where lies South Asia? Well, you know, and to a certain extent, we could have named this webinar Chinese expansionism across the Himalayas. Where lies Europe? Because this is the big question mark. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of India said, you know, something that has been very much quoted in the international press. Sometimes Europe sees all its problems as problems of the world, but sees problems of the world as somebody else's problems. And this is the issue. Europe understands what expansionism is when it feels it on its borders, but tends to forget what it is when it does not feel it. And that's a problem. That's a big problem. This European parochialism is an issue. And in our modest capacity, SADF intends to do its utmost to combat this sort of parochialism. And we have a very good set of speakers. We have the first one I will present now, and I will present the others in successive orders. The first is Professor Deepak. He is Professor of Chinese at the Center of Chinese and Southeast Asian Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. He was trained in Chinese history and India-China relations at the Beijing University and the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing. He is a professor now at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, and also in the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, as you know, United Kingdom. And thank you so much for having accepted our invitation. And without further delay, please, the floor is yours. We are really looking forward to listen to you and to see your presentation. Please.
Thank you, Paulo. Good to see all of you here, and old friend Siegfried Wolf and new friend Anna. I have difficulty in pronouncing your first name, so please excuse me. Always, good to interact. I remember last we interacted on the Himalayan waters. It was an excellent seminar. So thank you for inviting me, and I would be sharing some of my experiences and what I have been writing and what I have been communicating with, fellow scholars in India and also China and beyond. I have made some slides. Paulo, could you please tell me how much time I have got so that I could restrict myself within the limited time?
Well, feel free. We would like to see, 15 minutes would be the ideal, but I know that you have a lot to say, and we will have this, we'll keep this in our minds, and we will certainly, we are eager to see the explanation of the situation that you are preparing for.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll try my best, to skip some of the slides in order to keep within the time. So, to start with, I'll start with two propositions. One of the propositions is that the balance of power has shifted in favor of China. And if I see it in the context between India and China, so it is very, very clear, especially in the last 2 decades. The asymmetries are huge, and if we see, the GDP to GDP ratio, China is 5 to 6 times now, perhaps bigger than India, and so is this expenditure on defense and border infrastructure, so on and so forth. So this balance of power, which is favoring China, has resulted in a different behavior from China. And that is my second proposition, that is that China has been changing the status quo, not only in the South China Sea. In fact, it has replicated the scheme of things of South China Sea in the Himalayan regions, wherever it borders with countries like India, Bhutan, even Nepal recently. So this is my second proposition. And the third is a smaller proposition, which is the Chinese foreign minister and the leadership. They are calling on India that India should be placing the border problem in its proper position, which India finds problematic and unacceptable. So with these propositions, I would be focusing primarily on the second and the third. I will not be elaborating on the first one. So the modus operandi in changing status quo, which was my second, it is same as what had happened in South China Sea. First, you lay claims to large swaths of land, and then in the name of civilians, or whether they are fishermen, or whether they are civilian boats, or whether they are now so-called like border villages, which are coming across the Himalayan borders. So they would occupy them and then militarize them, and then finally to pass it as a fait accompli to the other nation. And if that doesn't work, as it has been in the case with India and China, so they will offer in place so-called buffer zones, for possible disengagement between the two forces. So here I will give some of the examples where India and China has been talking about on these friction points. So first, you may recall, this June 2020 clash in Galwan, and here it is the picture of the Galwan incident. It is here, patrolling point 14, where the fisticuffs between Indian and Chinese soldiers happened. Basically, what happened that now the Chinese, so they are arguing that their perceived line of actual control, so it is at the confluence of this Galwan and Shyok River. So this one is the Shyok River, and here is the Galwan River, and which moves further 7 to 8 kilometers to the west, even in 1956, and even during 1960, during the negotiation, that their line of actual control so lies somewhere here. So which is what India perceives that it was their border. So I will not go into the details of the incident, what happened in the aftermath when the disengagement started. So China said that, okay, so this is the point of friction where the clash happened. So you need to go back, 1.5 to 2 kilometers, and we will also go back. So that means after, changing the status quo, so it is another change of status quo by creating these buffer zones in the middle. And this has happened in other regions also. So for example, this is the famous Pankung Tso, or the Pankung Lake, where again the clash is not like Galwan. There were no fatalities, but yes, so there were a lot of issues here in the so-called finger areas. So these are mentioned in this slide. So finger 1, 2, 3, 4, and there are 8. So India's perceived border, the line of actual control, because it's not delineated on the ground. So it is here. I mean, this is the status quo which has been reinforced after the 1962. Otherwise, if you see earlier positions of India, so they were here, Shirijap and Shirijap too, because these were some of the points where the heavy fighting during 1962 took place. So now during this confrontation since 2020, this has also been resolved, but the modus operandi of China, it is the same. Okay, so they comes to finger 4 here, this area, and India used to patrol up to finger 8. So now the Chinese, so they are saying that, okay, so we will go back to finger 8, provided that this area in the middle, it is converted into a buffer zone. So that means, Indian forces, they are denied the access of patrolling, but they used to patrolling. And this, of course, happened between June and you can say 2022, and there are serious points of similar nature here in this next slide. So this is the latest where India and China, so they disengaged the Gogra hot spring area. Here again, if you see what Chinese have been claiming previously and what they are claiming now, so here is the huge area in the middle. So from this green line, all up to this route. So this is basically route to Galban, and this is a river, Kongrang River, and this is the Charlung River. So between them, so there is almost a distance of 1,000 square kilometers. So this has again been denied by China, and Indian troops, they used to patrol all the time to this area. So the place which is most contentious now, it is the Depsang plan, though the China has said that we have resolved all the friction points with the withdrawal from Gogra and Hot Spring. But this is the crux where again almost 900 square kilometer of the territory has been denied to India. So from this point, which is the DS-DBO road, India's last point below Karakoram here, and now India has built a road. This road is called DS-DBO road. I think perhaps it is the building of this road that it has created a lot of problems or anxieties for China, because now they saw India also reaching closer to the line of actual control, which earlier it was not there. So these points, patrolling point 10, 11, 12, all up to 13, so these have been now denied to India, and this is the so-called like Y junction, where the Chinese, they have moved to further west. So essentially, if we take into account this slide and also the previous slide, so it is almost and these smaller and bigger areas which we have disengaged from. So it's around 2,000 square kilometers of land which China has changed the status quo, for good. So now coming to these border villages, which is a new phenomenon. China is building in the friction points, I would say. And you can see this is, they are from open sources, and I have constructed these slides from the open source. This is August 2019, and this is November 2020. And you can see, more than 100 villages, houses, sorry, not villages, houses, they have come up, in the upper Subansiri district of Arunachal Pradesh, which of course China doesn't agree, and it claims the entire Arunachal Pradesh, which is around 90,000 square kilometer of land. But of course, there is a condition that if India cedes Taiwan, so then of course China would be able to perhaps consider, accepting the McMahon line, which demarcates China and India, though it's not delimitated again, demarcated on the ground. So the area in this place is in Longchu, which was also one of the sites of fierce fighting in 1962, and which perhaps at one point in time India thought, because Indian forces at that point in time, so they also took high grounds, especially on the crest of the mountains and peaks. So one of the areas was Miguitin, where again China's border villages under so-called well of society, they have come up. But according to India, so this is around 1 to 4 kilometers, 1.4 kilometers inside the McMahon line, which they have occupied in 1962. So here in the map, you can see this is Longchu, and this red line, it is a McMahon line, which separates India and China in the eastern sector. And then the place is here, Miguitin, and this is Longchu. So where China has come up with these border villages. So Miguitin, India has later considered that it was beyond McMahon line, but Longchu they still consider, and it has been elaborated by the Ministry of External Affairs that be object to China constructing these villages inside the Indian territory. Now, if you see some of the reports which are being published in open sources, for example, South China Morning Post, this is the paper which is owned by Jack Ma of Alibaba. So this report says that China has a plan to build 624 villages on the disputed borders. There's a disputed border as a part of his poverty alleviation scheme, and to ensure political stability in Tibet autonomous region. So this is as far as India is concerned. So now we move to Bhutan, because Bhutan's border with China is also unresolved. China borders 14 countries. It has resolved its issues with 12 countries. Only Bhutan and India are left, so there are a lot of problems. So initially, so there were only these 3 points of discord, 2 in the north and 1 in the west, and there was a swap formula, devised by China, that this Jaklung and Pasanlung, so they would be, swapped for Doklam in the west, and Doklam, as you know, that this was also one of the flashpoints between India and China in 2017. And after that incident, so China has consolidated its positions. And so not only that, so it has also laid, claim to now this Saktang Wildlife Sanctuary in the east, so which is also, shown in this red. So now, here again, if we talk about this tri-junction between India, Bhutan, and Tibet, because 1819 convention with China talks about time and again, it was not signed, between Bhutan and British India, but it was signed straight away between China, that is Qing Empire, and British India. Even the Tibetans, so they didn't recognize when they demarcated the boundary here, the tri-junction boundary. The Tibetans, they simply, didn't accept the demarcation, and they uprooted the pillars and all. So since then, China believes that their border is been defined by that convention of 1890. But if we look at the satellite imagery now, so the point is somewhere 6 to 7 kilometers up in the north, near a place called Patanglai. So that was the discord, which led to Doklam crisis in 2017. But I think I will not elaborate on this. But I'll straight away go to the villages which China has constructed. So in November 2020, one of our national television, so they revealed that Chinese, they were constructing model village called Pangda in Bhutanese territory on the banks of Machu River. So why I've mentioned that the Convention of 1890, because it says that the border is at the crest of the river, but not at the banks of the river. So that means now the Chinese, so they have come down to the banks of this Machu River, and here they have constructed this new village. So in early 2021, there was another report that China was encroaching on its other western claim with Bhutan and had constructed multiple new villages in 100 square kilometers. This was near Doklam, where the standoff, happened between Indian and Chinese forces. So now, in May 2021, Robert Barnett, the Tibetologist, he revealed that China had built a model village called Gyalapuk in the area of northern Bhutan. So means these areas which were disputed between Bhutan and China. So China is also now, creating border infrastructure in these places rather than solving the border issue or pressing Bhutan, for swapping this. At one point in time, it appears that Bhutan was ready, but then perhaps, also pressure from Indian government, because we have a special relationship with Bhutan. So in turn one, so they are constructing these so-called border villages, and another is in order to put more pressure on Bhutan. So they are also laying claims to this part of the land, which was never disputed. And you can see Tawang is just above this, and perhaps it is to create trouble for India also. And in the year 2022, this year, the Reuters, also reported on the satellite imagery that China had constructed more than 200 structures, including double-story building in different locations, including Doklam. So that means from 2017 and 2022, so China has indeed constructed, hundreds of villages inside Bhutanese territory, mostly near Doklam, and some in the northern areas. So this is a picture showing how much China is spending on the border infrastructure. If you see 13th five-year plan, it spent 20.5 billion for infra development in Tibet, and now this year, when the 14th five-year plan was announced, in fact, it was announced in 2021 2021, so it has further increased to 29.3 billion. So you can see it was 90,000 kilometers of roads until 2020, but now the same has reached to 120,000 kilometers in Tibet. So you can imagine the kind of infrastructure development activities, mostly along the borders, in accessible areas, and China wanting to have more access to the line of actual control, which erstwhile was inhabitable and not many people, they stayed in these areas. And mostly, of course, these are military. I don't think it has been built for the civilian, as has been the case of changing the status quo in other areas. So this is the map showing railway. So they have connected these areas with Sichuan and Yunnan. So this is the network of roads, and these are the railways. And one particularly, which Xi Jinping road last year is Ningxi, which is exactly opposite of Arunachal border, making a statement that China has, well-built infrastructure, and it can, manipulate the situation on the ground. So it says that now it is not that disadvantaged position as far as southern Tibet. They called this Arunachal Pradesh as southern Tibet or Nansang. And this is in Xinjiang, which I will not delve into. And this is their land transportation system, and other maybe landing grounds. So they have built across the LAC. So this is a little bit about the border law, because in 2021, so they passed a border law which has now come into effect from 1st January 2022. So it says the protection and exploitation of countries' land border areas, and especially I see that away from the western sector. Now the focus would be on eastern sector, where the resources are far better and greater than the western sector. So it has also used this land border to lay claims and then build structures. And of course, there are, for example, Article 40, it prohibits individuals or other entity to create permanent structures without the approval of relevant authorities. And this Article 43 delegates the construction, function, and capacity building of border towns to the state. So that is the Chinese government. I think I'm running out of time, so maybe I'll use another 1 or 2 minutes and then finish it. And of course, perhaps this is also one of the reasons, the abrogation of Article 370 by India in 2019. So this has also been cited as one of the reasons, because China has claims on certain areas in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. And BRI, of course, is one of the most talked affair. So that is also one of the things. But I think Paulo has perhaps stopped my presentation. So I think last slide, which I would focus on, is it is an answer to my proposition. So first, it would be very difficult to come back to the kind of equilibrium and understanding India and China had before you can say these border clashes. Of course, it goes back to 2013, and it would also depend upon India's realignment of forces and the kind of relationship it builds with major powers, including Europe, which is very important. And I think it will also depend on India's growth trajectory. If its growth rate doesn't pick up and the social cohesion and communal is not there, so kind of understanding we seek from China and global players, it would be impossible. As far as China's proposal for demilitarizing the zone, India is not in favor, because India believes China is not interested in resolving the border problem. It is prolonging it, procrastinating it, because China is talking from the point of strength. So India will not accept it. So rather, it is focusing on matching the Chinese infrastructure, whether it is rail, road, and air. And there is considerable improvement, though the progress is very slow. But I think as far as this economic resilience of India is concerned, India needs to do a little more, especially to improve its business environment, because cost of doing business in India is still very high. And last, I've quoted one example, because the logistics cost alone in India, so they account 13 to 15% of the product cost, whereas globally it is just about 6%. With these remarks, I'll finish, and I hope there would be questions, and I would be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Deepak, for this wonderful lesson. I think that we will need to continue. I think that your vision, your knowledge is very much in demand in Europe. I think Europe is very ignorant of what's going on over there, and we need you. We need you immensely. I did not stop your presentation. I would not dare to.
I'm sorry. I thought it was obstructed.
I would not dare to do a thing like that, because I was absolutely absorbed by what you were saying. I learned a lot. Of course, I think that you touched your parallel with with the South China Sea is brilliant. It's exactly what is happening for people who do not understand the Himalayas. Okay, just look at what you know better, and you understood it. It's absolutely brilliant. I do not want to waste any time of this webinar, so I would immediately give the floor to our next guest, Dr. Zsuza Ferenczy. She is assistant professor at the National Dong Hua University in Hualien, Taiwan. She is the head of Associates Network at 9-Line, a non-resident fellow at the Next Again Taiwan, consultant on China and India for Human Rights Without Frontiers. By the way, we owe to Human Rights Without Frontiers the opportunity of knowing you, then that I would like to stress. And this was a tremendous opportunity because you are, you are a European, but you are in Taiwan. Taiwan, who to me is the temple of democracy. I've been there when I was a European parliamentarian. I'm very glad that a lot of American congressmen have been doing the same. Apparently, some of our appeasing public opinion thinks it's a crime for a congressman, or in this case, a congress lady, the Speaker of the House, to visit Taiwan. I think she did a very good thing. I think this is exactly what has to be done. And a lot of other congressmen have been there before and after, and it is absolutely ludicrous to say that a lady of such importance visiting such a heaven of democracy would be a crime and would justify a military invasion. It's absolutely ludicrous. But not wasting any more time, you are in Taiwan. You are an expert on India-China's relations, and we would like to hear you on the whole of this issue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Casaca. It's really a pleasure to be here, and also good to be on the panel with my fellow panelists. And also thank you for South Asia Democratic Forum for organizing this event. And because we are quite short on time, I believe I will go straight to making my presentation and making a few remarks. And I would like to build on the excellent and very specific presentation of Professor Deepak. I've also really much appreciated your comments. My view or my input will be rather general. Perhaps it will be useful to give a context to what you so eloquently presented, and I will then also speak about Taiwan. So what I would like to do in the next 10-15 minutes is to actually focus on three elements. In the first part, I would like to speak a little bit about Beijing's posture in the Indo-Pacific and Xi Jinping's ambitions in the region. Then second part, I would like to place Taiwan in this context and speak about Taiwan's relevance and importance. And finally, to have a few remarks on the EU's position concerning Taiwan and the escalation of tension in the Taiwan Strait and what role the EU can or should or would play in the region. So first, on Beijing's regional and global ambitions. So I'd like to place the discussion in the context of the Indo-Pacific, as it is a region that has really been changing in profound ways. A region where most of global trade takes place, where the EU has also started to acknowledge that it has its own interests to protect. This is why we saw, I believe, in September 2021, the Indo-Pacific strategy of the European Union being put out. It's still to be implemented, but this strategy is indicative that there is a recognition in Brussels of the importance of the Indo-Pacific as a region. Also because more than 1/3 of European exports go to the Asia-Pacific markets, and a majority of these transit through the sea lanes of the Indian and the Pacific Oceans. And economic growth in Asia is really reshaping the strategic landscape, and China's growth is accelerating shifts in relative economic and strategic weight. So that means that in parts of the Indo-Pacific, including in Southeast Asia, China's power and influence have grown to match or even exceed that of the United States. So going forward, like all great powers, I suspect China will seek to influence the region to serve its own interests. And this will lead to an increasingly contested Indo-Pacific region, because Beijing's drive to modernize its military and expand its reach abroad is not surprising and reflects, I guess, the natural tendency of emerging powers to exert increasing influence beyond their borders. So, as I suppose a lot of analysts have agreed in the past, that Xi Jinping wants to turn China into a dominant power in the region. And for this, it has deployed military infrastructure on disputed islands and increased pressure on Taiwan. China is, at the same time, the most important trading partner for most countries in the region, which complicates the challenge of how we address the assertiveness that comes out of Beijing, because this means that Beijing's leverage has been increasing with its economic weight, and Beijing has indeed relied on its economic strength to generate its influence. It has used its Belt and Road Initiative, as Professor Deepak also mentioned, but Beijing also used this economic power to exert influence in a strategic way and use economic coercion in fact against its neighbors. So Australia, South Korea, the Philippines, Taiwan have all been victims of the economic coercion, which is actually not only an Indo-Pacific problem, because it has gone beyond the Indo-Pacific, and European member states such as Lithuania, and also beyond Lithuania, other European countries have been victims. So this is just to bring in the complexity of the picture that we're dealing with. And so what we're seeing is an increased competition over economic integration. And this means that there is a risk that trade, which in the past has restrained strategic rivalry, is actually now fueling it instead. So a few words on China's military modernization. Beijing has rapidly improved the capability of its armed forces. Xi Jinping has been pushing to transform the PLA from a largely territorial force into a major maritime power. China has now the largest navy and air force in Asia, as well as the largest coast guard in the world. And Xi Jinping has emphasized a military-civil fusion, with Chinese firms forging relationships with foreign companies, acquiring know-how with military applications. And we have to remember that the PLA is, in fact, the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party. So the main objective is to protect the party's rule. And moving beyond the militarization, of course, the China dream that Xi Jinping has been pursuing is to be realized with the strict control of the CCP and a loyal PLA. So since coming to power, Xi Jinping has cleansed the party and the military and has consolidated his power through an extensive anti-corruption campaign. So the PLA Navy has been developing capabilities for use in distant seas. So it opened its first military base in Djibouti near Chinese operative port in 2017, and has also directly increased its military presence in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. The South China Sea is home to strategically vital shipping lanes, and the purpose of the artificial islands is to give China the ability to enforce its claims to 90% of the South China Sea. And I guess this is where I could directly connect to Professor Deepak's points on the significance of the status quo and the China's modus operandi in changing the status quo, and how this is something that we've seen unfold in the South China Sea. So what I try to illustrate here is that China has much greater power projection capabilities today, telling its neighbors that it intends to assert its so-called historic rights to maritime resources such as oil and gas and fish. But of course, we have to remember to take a step back and remember that China has significant domestic challenges. We right now still have a zero COVID policy in place that has shown its negative consequences on economic growth and innovation. And these problems will not be easy to solve, but they may delay Beijing's efforts to turn China into a world-class military power. So what does this all mean for Taiwan? Well, taking Taiwan by force, if necessary, is at the core of Xi Jinping's global plans. And as China has modernized its military, it has intensified pressure on Taiwan. In fact, Taiwan has been the main catalyst in PLA modernization. Beijing views Taiwan as part of the PRC, and it does not negotiate on this point. And I think the reaction, the heavy-handed reaction to the visit of Nancy Pelosi in August was an indication that this is the case, that China does not compromise, that that Beijing is trying to set a new normal and de facto changing the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. So what from the statistics or from my reading is that half of the aircraft that was sent by China towards Taiwan between August the 5th and the 25th crossed the median line. This is not the first time, but the scale of intensity of this heavy-handed reaction is changing the status quo on the ground, de facto changing it. Also, Beijing does not recognize the median line as a legal border, and its Air Force has been testing it since the late 90s. At the same time, I would like to add that disrupting the stability in the region overall is not in Beijing's interest. So I think it is important to be mindful of what the strategic interests of Beijing are and how important Taiwan is for Beijing. But whether and how far Beijing will go in achieving this goal, I think is where we need to perhaps take a step back and recall that the stability in the region will be vital for Beijing to go forward in achieving its objectives. And I think for Beijing, its relations with the EU will also be very important in terms of its economic objectives. So perhaps this is a good point or good moment for me to turn to my last part in my presentation in terms of the EU's role in this picture. And also, I guess we have legitimate questions. And as you, Mr. Casaca, spoke earlier about the EU's role in this picture. One is to say what the EU's capabilities are in a Taiwan Strait contingency, and also to question the Europeans' political will to participate in anything that happens in the Taiwan Strait. But keeping in mind that there is an awareness in Brussels that the Indo-Pacific region is a vital region for the European Union's future prosperity and security, the EU has a stake in the Taiwan Strait. So I would say, as I sit in Taiwan and I follow the developments inside Taiwan, but I also travel between Europe and Taiwan, I recognize that on both sides, there's a mutual awareness of each other's importance. And there's an increasing willingness in Brussels to speak about Taiwan. So just this week, we had a European Parliament resolution that was passed, and there was a plenary debate in Brussels that highlighted the importance of Taiwan, the importance of the European Union to assume a more important role in the region. So this is coming out of the European Parliament. Of course, I am aware that this is not a legally binding resolution. As someone who worked in the Parliament for over 10 years, I probably have I've had the privilege of seeing how things work within the House, and also to recognize that there is a lot of ambition that comes out of the European Parliament. And I think this resolution that was voted on this week also is an ambitious text. But if we look at the bigger picture of the mood in Brussels in light of Beijing's diplomatic support to Moscow in its aggression against Ukraine, and also in the context of a rethink of the Europeans vis-a-vis Beijing, vis-a-vis China, in terms of the asymmetry that we have in our relationship, I think there is an appetite to push things forward where Taiwan gets a more important role in our political discourse. But this is something that will take time, and I think it will depend not just on the Europeans' political will, but also it will depend on China's behavior in the near future. As I mentioned, the diplomatic support that Beijing has been offering Moscow did not go down well in Brussels. And I believe that just to come to the end of my remarks here, I know that the EU is not a military power, and I think this is clear for all of us. And our capacity is limited, and so is our political will. I'm also aware of that. But I think cooperating with like-minded partners in the Pacific, which we've seen growing with India, with South Korea, because we see that there is an appetite in strengthening security cooperation within the region. So we have the quadrilateral dialogue between India and the US, Australia and Japan. I see a clear awareness in Brussels that we need to move along these lines, and we have specific member states who are driving this process forward. So I believe that this momentum is going to last, but I also encourage the European member states that they need to step up their efforts, and they need to start a regular conversation and also an open conversation on what role they want to play in a Taiwan contingency, how they can strengthen their strategic partnership with India, and how they can work closer together with other countries in the region, including Japan. So perhaps I come to the end of my presentation here so that we have some time for a conversation and an exchange. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zsuza Ferenczy. Absolutely, these are very much welcome signs from the European Parliament. I would even say that when we saw for the very first time the European budget to contribute very modestly, we have to say, we should not be overemphasizing it, but still, it did contribute to the defense of Ukraine from the imperial aggression of Mr. Putin. Well, this is quite a revolution. So there are some small signs. Hopefully, they will not be like in Ukraine, a bit too late, too little, because this is the point. Europe, the signs of the aggressive plans of Mr. Putin in Ukraine were there to be seen for a very, very long time, and it was necessary to see these horrendous invasion, these tremendous crimes against humanity that the Russian forces are doing in Ukraine, forcing some reaction from the European institutions. Thank you very much for your contribution. And now, last but not least, Dr. Siegfried Wolf. He is the man of the house. He is our director of research. He is very well known for everyone that is following SADF. He is a member of the South Asia Institute in Heidelberg University. He is an academic from the Heidelberg University. He has a PhD he obtained there on exactly South Asia political science. And he is also a visiting professor at the Naresuan University in Thailand and a visiting scholar at the Salle University in Manila. And he is with us, and we are very glad to have him. Please, the floor is yours, Dr. Wolf.
Yeah, dear Paulo, thank you very much for your kind words of introduction. And of course, it's again a great pleasure to have the opportunity with us esteemed speakers and co-panelists to share views. To start my own elaboration on the topic, I want to thank also Professor Deepak for this excellent and very detailed outlining of the border issues between China and India. This makes my job much more easier, so I can rely on your provided informations, and some of my elaboration you will perhaps know a bit now from Professor Deepak, but thanks, unfortunately, to time concerns, I might have the opportunity to add a little bit more where Professor Deepak had to stop because of the time concerns. So, and a little bit like a roundup and to share my view, which I have from Europe on the issue. As we already heard from Professor Deepak, Beijing is pushingly, increasingly its expansionist agenda at its Himalayan frontiers with South Asia. I also discussed this issue in an earlier publication by SADF. You will find the reference in the outline of our conversation today. As we also heard from Professor Deepak, China constructed hundreds of settlements, not only along the Tibetan side of the mountainous region, but also within the territory of its neighboring Bhutan. Here, a report of Robert Barnett identified not only an intensification of construction activities, but also an extension of types of infrastructure built by China on claimed territories, which means road, villages, military outposts, and other security surveillance facilities. The latter, as well as similar reports from the China-Nepalese border region, are reflecting for me the wider expansionist strategy by the Chinese leadership. That strategy begins with a formulation of territorial claims, which you heard from Dr. Zsuza and Professor Deepak, vis-a-vis a given neighbor, followed by the launch of a construction campaign within the disputed area, in turn accompanied by migrants, Chinese settler, which are usually characterized also by paramilitary features. In my earlier mentioned work on the subject, I refer to the argument made by Don McLean Gill that China has been quietly expanding its territorial reach throughout South Asia to maximize power and to constrain New Delhi's role as a status quo power in the region. Observing the latest developments in the northeastern areas of the Himalayas, which Professor Deepak wonderfully explained, there is an increasing concern that Beijing is reaching out for Indian territory more vigorously. There are several indications substantiating such a threat perception, underpinning that China has become more aggressive in its territorial claims over Indian territory, and I want to highlight in this context 4 points. As already mentioned before, on January 1st this year, the new land border law in China came into effect, apparently designed to standardize and strengthen the country's border control and protection. But the law highlights that Beijing will resolutely defend its national sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. In other words, China will take all measures to safeguard its interests with the specific borders by any means, be it militarily or economic. Considering the tone and the timing, there is a view among international experts that this legislation will be used to justify a more assertive Chinese posture and signaling Beijing's determination to resolve the border disputes on its preferred terms. Following this rationale, Taipei-based analyst Liam Gibson, because Anna might know him, describes the new law as a tool for Beijing to further expand its sovereignty into its neighbor's domain. That the land borders law is encouraging the proactive resolution of outstanding border issues as well as effectively legitimize the use of force along its borders, creates additional concerns among observers. According to former Indian ambassador to China, Gautam Bambawale, by their action in eastern Ladakh, the Chinese are clearly indicating that they are tired of trying to resolve the boundary or the LAC through negotiations. They are indicating they will do it through use of force. Another critical aspect of the border law for me is that it provides for a civil-military fusion strategy, emphasizing the improvement of public services and infrastructure along the borders, as also incorporating the local population in territorial defense. It is noteworthy here that the law calls for increased settlement of the civilian population along the border. China has previously used the strategy of moving its civilian population along the contested part of the line of actual control on the basis of which it claims rightful ownership. At this early occasion, observers are pointing out that the build-up of infrastructure along the border got accompanied by a remarkable number of border intrusions. As such, there are worries that the new law might increase such instances and create further problems between the two countries. In sum, this will not only lead to further militarization of the border region, but makes any negotiation over border issues more difficult. Some analysts are identifying the border law as a roadblock in any further negotiations and settlement of border issues because it makes China borders a priori sacred and inviolable, and it gives the responsibility for border management and protection towards the PLA and the paramilitary People Armed Police, both under the command of the Central Military Commission. According to some commentators, the PLA might refuse to concede any of its actual and claimed land, such as Arunachal Pradesh and Ladakh. The second point I want to highlight here is that on December 31, actually at the eve when the new land border law was taking effect, China's Ministry of Civil Affairs released its own set of standardized names for 15 locations in India's Arunachal Pradesh state. This is not the first time China has attempted such a renaming of places in the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. Arunachal Pradesh is shown on Chinese maps since a long time as Sangnam or South Tibet, and in 2017, Beijing issued 6 official names of places there. However, the timing of the latest attempt of renaming places on Indian territory is a clear signal of intent by Beijing of that it plans to increase pressure on New Delhi for control over the Arunachal Pradesh state. According to Chinese analysts, the renaming of places as well as the border law were important moves made by the country to safeguard national sovereignty, better maintain national security, and manage border-related matters as a legal level amid regional tensions, including frictions with India. Now, it's crucial to stress that the new list of renamed places are longer than the one published in 2017, covering 11 out of Arunachal 25 districts. According to Indian observers, the spread of the location suggests the places were chosen to reiterate Chinese claims to the whole state of Arunachal Pradesh. My third point is that we witness a massive build-up of Chinese infrastructure along the border with India's Arunachal Pradesh, which we saw earlier on Professor Deepak's pictures. These construction activities were carried out in the presence of PLA soldiers. Indian army sources confirmed that the activities are taking on the Chinese side of the line of actual control. Despite India's sustained objections, China has continued building infrastructure projects close to the Indian border. The massive upgrading and establishment of new settlements next to Arunachal Pradesh needs to be seen in the overall improvement of roads and railways connectivity in all border areas with India. It is crucial to emphasize that the new border laws and the unilateral renaming of places in Arunachal Pradesh coincided with stepped-up plans to China to bolster its control along disputed areas, including by constructing frontier village and civilian settlement. As such, we have to see there is a comprehensive new, not new, but more intensive strategy on the China side, which we can detect. My fourth and last point in this direction is that Chinese rhetoric of being interested in resolving outstanding border issues gets hardly reflected in the actual dialogue between Beijing and New Delhi, especially not with respect towards the notion of mutuality. In July, during the 16th and most recent round of bilateral talks between top commanders, both sides reached an agreement on disengagement at the patrolling point 15 at the Gokra Hot Springs in eastern Ladakh, which we already heard. But numerous Indian and Chinese voices describing this as a positive development. However, from my perspective, there are also analysts raising doubts that the outcome of the latest border talks will lead to a normalization in India-China relations, particularly towards a sustainable process in solving the outstanding territorial disputes. And this scholars, experts are putting several points in this direction forward. Most interestingly, to begin with, is that China immediately reiterated its stance that it would not accept India's demand to restore the status quo prior to China's transgression, saying the status quo of April 2020, the time when the border clashes took place, or the most massive border clashes in the latest history, was created by India's, from the Chinese perspective, illegal crossing of the line of actual control. The second interesting point in this context is that the agreement over the disengagement of both countries' armed forces on the patrolling point 15 relates to the smallest Chinese encroachment into Indian territory. It's reported that Beijing refuses to even negotiate over remaining larger frictions, like in the areas of Denchok and Depsang, places in which China's largest and deepest transgressions into traditional Indian patrolling areas took place. As such, expert commentator Brahma Chilani states that the return of peace and tranquility in the border region still looks distant. The third point we made in this context is that the agreement will most likely lead to the establishment, what we already heard, of a so-called buffer zone with no patrolling by either side, which actually means, according to some analysts, which was also confirmed by Professor Deepak, that the actual loss of control patrolling over territory which Indian armed forces were exercising before. In other words, China was able to achieve the formalization of a changed status quo. To sum up, the large-scale build-up of infrastructure, massing of troops, and creation of new settlements at the Chinese side of the line of actual control adds to the grim perspective regarding the future developments in the eastern Himalaya and other parts of this area. China's new land border laws, providing its armed forces what I would describe as an internal carte blanche for the use of violence against the country's neighbors, which make a peaceful solution of conflicts over disputed territory becoming even more difficult. One last line I want to add, and also to refer to Dr. Zsuza's elaboration and very interesting statement when it comes to the European Union. What I see at the moment is that, as Dr. Zsuza mentioned, there is a lot of very increasing sensitivity and understanding when it comes to Taiwanese security concern. But unfortunately, until now, I don't see this understanding and sensitivity when it comes to Indian concerns within European institutions. And I hope and I think there is a lot to do in future, and that there might be a very good opportunity, in particular when we consider the terrible developments in the Ukraine and the break of international law and norms, that this will change and that there is a much more avenue to cooperate between European Union and India. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Siegfried. I think that we really got a very large consensus on the vision we have of the problematic we see on the ground. Dr. Wolf has been following the issue very much. He authored last year one of the pioneer comments on the situation regarding Bhutan, and that was quite well highlighted by Professor Deepak. To all of those that are following us, I would like to say it is possible to comment, to make comments through the social media, through Facebook and through YouTube. It will be possible very soon to do it as well in LinkedIn, and we welcome all comments. Well, but the issue here, as at this point, allows me to make perhaps a first question, which is, China, at least formally, addresses or makes its territorial expansion in quite a different manner than Russia does. The issue of the South China Sea is really impressive. So it is a mix of economic pressure, of facts on the ground, of skirmishes, of, for instance, in the South China Sea, a fishing fleet that is more a militia than there for militia and military purposes than actually to fish, although it can fish as well, and with some ecological tragic consequences as well. But in a nutshell, the issue is how should we perceive this Chinese expansionism in its difference to a classic brutal expansionism like the one that we are seeing between Russia and Ukraine. I don't know, perhaps I would address the issue to everyone. I don't know if Professor Deepak wants to be the first one to elaborate and to complement, of course, to his very rich intervention. Professor Deepak?
Oh. Yeah, I think I was muted, so unmuted now. So thank you, Paulo, for this question. I think, the China, perhaps, as far as India is concerned, so it has kept the border issue alive because it's not really wanting to resolve it. even though it was the first to argue for the East-West swap, that is the actual jurisdiction of respective sectors, it would belong to the parties, those who have it. So that is gone out of the window in the mid-80s, and now it is claiming entire Arunachal on the one hand, and the Western sector also, where it had so never claimed in its earlier negotiations. I think why China is behaving like this, especially in the region, including India. So one, I also made a couple of assumptions that it is China's economic power or coercion, which was brought up during the discussion. And the second also, is military coercion. And it believes that if these land borders are unsettled, so China, relying on its, you can say, asymmetrical power, vis-a-vis neighbor, so it could realize its intentions as far as expansion is concerned. So in the Himalayas, of course, it is a vast desert, you can say, rich resources are there. Initially, they simply wanted to keep oxygen. Now even oxygen has been in the news because there are, possible, you can say, minerals which are equally important for China's, say, rice, or the way they have been, exploiting the resources of other countries through Belt and Road Initiative. And I think as long as the China believes it is having, you can say, the point of strength with its neighbors, I don't think it would be, wanting to resolve these crises. And some we have seen how from South China Sea, the youth have, brilliantly, it has changed the status quo overnight and without any fuss. Even the United States not been able to check it there. And now Taiwan Straits it has done. And perhaps the fait accompli would be given and passed on to the receptors if they are okay with it. And most of the time, I think they would be okay because they are the weaker powers. But perhaps not against India, because India has stood up against China, and perhaps has also called the Chinese bluff. And China perhaps testing the water that India means business, even if India has to get convinced through these buffer zones. But it will stand up, and a large conflict with India, perhaps it would be self-destructive. So therefore, perhaps against India, it may not be willing to use so-called comprehensive national strength, to realize its goal. But of course, discreetly, or the way we call it in this part of the world, salami slicing, it will continue to resort on those tactics.
Thank you so much.
Not the Russian way bulldozing into Ukraine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you are absolutely right. It is salami slicing. Exactly. They will not, I don't think, I think you are absolutely correct. They will not dare to confront directly. They will make pressure. They will continue to make pressure. I think that, Dr. Anna Zsuza Ferenczy pointed out to a thing that is very important, which is this COVID mania that really, how can, with their policy, their present policy, how can they put, the army, in a country that does not obey to the same rules. It's a bit of a difficulty that they have as well in the meantime. And of course, we know that China prefers as well to make rounds to try to conquer positions. Sri Lanka, Maldives, Pakistan, that has been very obvious in encircling India. And I think that your vision is absolutely absolutely correct, and it's really very far-sighted. Well, some more comments from you on this. Yes, please. Ladies first.
Yes. Thank you. No, I just want to echo Professor Deepak's comments on the question of asymmetry, because I think in all these relationships, and I think I tried to illustrate that in the Asia Pacific, the economic element is a really important one. And that is clearly also the case with Taiwan and China in terms of the economic interdependence, which gives China, or the power that has the upper hand, and the asymmetry in favor, which is China in this case, more leverage over the situation. So I think we need to address the economic element in the mix of the approach that China has, as the question was articulated. And from a European perspective, I think that even though things move forward slowly, as Dr. Wolf also said, indeed things go forward slowly, but we are in the process of boosting our geostrategic defense toolbox. So the anti-coercion instrument that is being worked on at the moment in the European side, I think it will, once it is up and running, I think the fact that we will have it will have a deterrent, or might have a deterrent effect just by having it, because I think it sends a signal that we are serious about rebalancing our relationship. So I think the asymmetry element is very important. And also, I think we need to do a bit more work on the effect actually of economic coercion and how it works, and how China uses it differently against its partners in different ways, and how the relationship between power and vulnerability works. I think we also need to do more studying of that. So just wanted to echo that point in Professor Deepak's remarks.
Thank you very much. Siegfried, do you want to add something? Thank you, Paulo. Just some short points when it comes to the comparison between China and Russia. Perhaps we should think about three points, which of course you already mentioned, which is most pressing at the moment: the military dimension. And I think we all agree that China is much more cunning, with in particular when we look at the civilian fusion strategy with this hidden navy, fisher boats, and what they're doing in the Himalaya with the setting up of villages and using also civilian population, not like the Russian, which they're not capturing anything, they're destroying, they're wiping out. We see picture which nobody of an army, behavior of an army which we never thought will appear again, after the Second World War. This massive destruction and artillery fires. So I think this, we thought it's not there anymore, but it's back. The second point, so I think this we hardly can compare China with Russia aggressions. But what is interesting is, in particular for us in Europe, you should not forget that when it comes to economic coercive measures, what we are now live experience, everybody's life experience this energy instrument, what the Russians successfully applying, and you have to see how the winter will go. But the same on side is on China. Immediately when you don't do what China wants, you have immediately coercive ramification, like what happens to the Australians. And so there are many cases where China, like Russia, uses economic instrument to enforce some compliance to their interests. And the third one, which is also very interesting, is where we have a lot of similarities, I think, between these two autocratic regimes, how they use public diplomacy, influence operation, and we heard already the Belt and Road Initiative today. So when we see what the massive Chinese influence operation, or let's say how much money even was pushed into Brussels to organize pro-Chinese Belt and Road events, how nice it is and everything. So there are a lot of things happening, but I think in this direction, the Russians are much smarter, much more successful. When you see how this turn in the public opinion perception in Europe on the Belt and Road, the massive critic which came up, and it's not only because of debt drops, it's also related with what China behavior during the mass diplomacy, which was also not well perceived in Europe during the pandemic. I also mentioned it's interesting to recall the term which came up in the recent 1 or 2 years, the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy. So and now when you see on the Russian side, and we have still follow very closely not the whole European debate, but the debate in Germany, how we should support Ukraine, and there and in particular how which kind of approach we should have to a potential political solution, which is now, when you look at all the disasters and human rights violations the Russian forces are doing, hilarious. And when you see but here, and there's also the latest reports, we have to see how true it is, when it's verified, the amount of money Russia spent pushed into Europe to create a pro-Russian voices, and when I see a lot of German, unfortunately also politicians who have a pro-Russian stand, it means that Russia is very, very successful, much more successful, I think, than China at the moment. But this we have to see how this develops. So I think there was just some notes on when we compare Russia and China and their activities from military to influence operation, which we should not forget that this is also happening, in particular when it comes to the independence of European decision-making and how this country's autocratic regimes try to influence our decision-making process here in Europe. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that these issues that were raised by both Siegfried and Zsuza are very, very important. The issue of deterrence, which is the number one question that should be in place, that we have to think in Europe, we have to think very, very deeply on how to apply it in the Indo-Pacific. Europe cannot forget the Indo-Pacific, cannot have a parochial view as it has up to now. The economic coercion is an issue in itself. The issue of now finally there people are starting to wake up to this. I mean the last figures coming out are that in secret loans, not to speak about the BRI in itself, but the consequences of the BRI, but in secret loans, China is now much more important than the IMF, for instance, at the world level. And as Professor Deepak said before, it's not any longer an issue for the Indo-Pacific. It's a world issue. It's everywhere. It's even in Europe. Although it's not very much talked about, but it is also in Europe. It is obviously in Latin America and Africa. It is everywhere. And one has really to see what's going on. Siegfried is quite right on the issue of the different sort of expansionism, what we are seeing in Ukraine. I mean, it amounts to genocide to start with. I was really appalled when I saw some spokespersons of supposedly human rights, international human rights organizations to say, oh, no, the question of genocide, it's obviously genocide. I mean, whoever knows a bit of the issue has no doubts about it. The barbarity is, comparable to the Second World War. Absolutely. Things are not, did not reach that stage, of course not. Regarding China, China has been much more clever. It's no question about that. It is much more developed. I mean, the basic issue is the one that Professor Deepak raised in the beginning. I mean, the difference of GDP between China and India, that's the most important fact that we have to understand when equating the whole of the scenario. But it poses a long-term threat that might be more important than the one of Russia, for instance. I tend to see Russia as, the number one nuclear power in the world, of course. It's very important, but otherwise, third worldish. And the facts are there for those who doubt to see on the ground how it is. China is not like that, no. So that's a much more important issue. And I hope the European institutions start to understand what are the real challenges, because Europe cannot look at itself like the center of the universe, forgetting about the rest of the world. That's not the way forward. That's really what I think. I don't know if any of you want to add something in this debate. This debate is being recorded, and it will be available shortly in our website through YouTube, and so everyone can look at it. I think that it deserves to be continued. This issue has to be deepened for sure. You made wonderful contributions. Of course, if any of you have the time and the opportunity, we will be much welcoming your written contributions in our publications. And we certainly will continue to discuss the present topic. So, if no one else wants to say anything else, I just want to...
I think...
please.
Just a small thing. I think this is what Zsuza and Wolf, they also elaborated, just substantiating it a bit. Because I think China is, wanting to see the larger picture. So where it wanted to position itself at the center of the world stage. And this also then, brings us to another thing, what kind of the political, economic architecture it would like to establish. And then I think the way it is moving bit by bit towards it, though discreetly, the typical Chinese way. So that I think maybe the world population, especially Europe, which sometimes, as our foreign minister says, that it is indifferent to some of the issues, perhaps of this part of the world. Because if we see how China wanting to make the world dependent on it, whether it is the supply chains, the goods and services being offered, through the BRI, and the way, especially, it has been designing or planning for self-sufficiency in key industries, key sectors. So making China 2025 is all about it. And the big fund, which we have been talking about, though there is a little bit storm in China's, semiconductor industry, but it is very much, geared towards that direction, where the world will have a dependence on China in key sectors and key technologies. So I think it is here the European Union, as a unit, and in tandem with the United States and perhaps other like-minded people. So they really need to look into that, because if we talk about Industrial Revolution 4.0, so then these technologies, especially the dominance of a particular country or a bloc on these technology, it is going to be very, very detrimental to the regional peace and security, and also the upcoming global order that we are contemplating. So with this, I think I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Deepak. Thank you very much, Dr. Zsuza Ferenczy. Thank you very much, Dr. Siegfried Wolf. Thank you very much, Albino, for managing the whole of our debate. We will continue in touch. This will be available very soon, in a few hours, I hope, for all of those who want to continue to see it. And we will continue our initiatives, and we are very much thankful to, once again, for your participation. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.